Hello, everybody. This is Carol Rizzardi, currently president of Jane Stories Press Foundation. And with me today is Ellen Birkett Morris. Ellen is the author of one of our finalists for the Clara Johnson Award this year. She authored this incredible collection of short stories called Lost Girls. And I'm going to ask Ellen if she will give her introduction to what she wanted the collection to do. In her afterward, she said she wanted the book to get close to touching the truth about the challenges and joys of being a woman, chief among them being seen, acknowledged, remembered, and heard. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, because I found that an enormous task to take on. And I will say, I think you did it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's common knowledge that women's contributions are not recognized in the same way that men's contributions are. And so what women have had to do is really create, I think, informal networks, underground networks, foundations, Facebook groups, special places to gather so that we can see and acknowledge each other's work. And I think even in literature, oftentimes women's writing is sort of pushed to the side or dismissed in certain ways. And so it was really important to me that this book try to take on those kinds of questions. And I'd say, particularly given my personal history, I tell people that I was the perfect person to write this book. I'm a Southern woman. I have a mild case of cerebral palsy and rheumatoid arthritis. My entire life, I've really had to step forward and say, I'm here. I'm here, and here's what I have to say, and so in some ways you have to be braver, fiercer, more generous than your peers as a woman, just to get a seat at the table. So in each of these stories, I was thinking about that. Different stories would fall into each of those categories that you mentioned, but in each of these stories, I was thinking about how these women put themselves forward, and then how these women support each other in their quest to succeed or survive, whichever it is.
I like that you said that, because one of the stories, and I'm going to be looking around at my notes, but I saw the kinship between the women, especially the young girls. The one girl who burned the lingerie of the woman and her friends, and I don't want to give anything away, but there was a sisterhood among so many of the women that just touched me. I thought, oh, how beautiful that at such a young age they realize how important this is.
Yeah. And that was really fun to write, and also true to my experience, the kinds of friends I had when I was younger, and the way we would hang together and support each other. The friend whose house I spent the night at, the night that I found out my parents were getting a divorce, the ways in which we really leaned on each other. And so that was really a lot of fun to write.
That's great. Which one of the stories is closest to you? If you can say, might be like trying to pick your favorite child, but if you had maybe a couple of them that were special to you in a certain way.
Yeah, I really like I Miss Not Being a Ballerina, because of that sort of lovely friendship that those two girls in that story have, the way they support each other, sometimes even fibbing to each other about, you're not chubby, or you're good in this way or that way. And maybe they're not, but they love each other, and they're going to be there and support each other. And so I thought there was a lot of tenderness in that story. I like the way I was able to play around with some of the ways in which female roles were depicted in 60s and 70s television. So this little girl, she's not taken any of it. She knows none of that is true. And so that was a lot of fun to write. The other one, though, that I really feel close to is religion. And partly because it's funny and it's sad. And when I started to write it, I thought to myself, this is a story about social pressure. This is about what happens when we get into a group and we feel like we need to conform to the group, But the truth is, as I wrote the story, I discovered quickly that it was really about loneliness. It was just about wanting to fit in, yeah.
I agree. That's what I have in my notes, hungry baby, hungry woman, hunger, loneliness, wanting the contact, wanting the nurturing.
Absolutely. And when I got to that last sentence, when I got to the last sentence of the story, the small babies, the sun shining in on these babies, and they're so hungry, I knew that I had landed just exactly where I wanted to land with that. So that's one I feel really good about. Also, it got published in the Antioch Review, which is a bit of a feat to do. And he said, that Rob Fogarty, the editor there, said, he really took it because he thought it was really funny. And he didn't get a lot of stories that were able to sort of walk that line between funny and poignant. So.
And I appreciate that because sometimes, I've read some great literature that I've had to put down because it was too emotionally overwhelming. But being able to just pull the reader back from the edge to break that tension, it's almost Shakespearean.
Well, it's certainly exciting to do on the page. When you feel like you've done it, there's just that moment when you say, this is why I write, this is why I do it.
One of the stories that haunts me still is Inheritance. And that story, I absolutely had to put the book down because, and again, I'm hesitant. I don't want to say too much to give things away, but she found a way out, even when everybody shut the door. Her father, her mother betrayed her. Everybody betrayed her. She found the ultimate way out, but she found the way out.
She did it. And in finding a way out, she found a way to make a very powerful statement because she ends up doing the thing she does in front of the house of the man who has exploited her in a way that's going to become very public to the people, to their friends and neighbors. People are going to know there's a reason why she did that there. And I have to say, writing that story, it was sort of a coming of age for me as a writer because I wanted to get her out of trouble so bad. So I put her on a train and I thought she's going to escape. And I stopped and I thought, no, there's no way they would let her escape. There's no way she's got to figure another way out of this. And so I was really forced to make choices as a writer that I didn't want to make. I had to pull myself into making the tough choice that ends that story. And the way I did it was that I thought, this girl is so strong and so fierce and so angry that she's going to do this. She's going to go there. And so, yeah, it was a revelation to me as I wrote it, as I hope it is to people as they read it. So
I loved it. Do any of the stories, like I said, Inheritance just speaks to me incredibly. I don't even know how to express it, but is there a story that speaks to you in that way that you just can't get it out of your mind?
Oh gosh, and I did take some notes on some of the ones that really stuck with me. I would say Kodachrome is interesting to me. Kodachrome is something, the story that I really couldn't let go of, and I've read that story at literature conferences, and people have asked me about that narrator. They're really curious as to what her mental state is, and so it's the story about a little girl who finds her father's girly magazine and notices, instead of noticing the nudity, notices the colors and instantly is curious about what her own colors will be. And it's sort of her quest to find her colors, to get her picture taken, to see what shows up when she's the one behind the lens. There's an innocence to be seen. She wants to be seen. But there's also just a tremendous innocence there. It doesn't enter her mind that she could be exploited in any way, that this could be she just simply is curious. It's pure curiosity. And so that's one. And that was one that really, yeah, I mean, just kind of working that out. I think giving her a central obsession, like, what are my colors? What are my true colors? Is the thing that drove that particular narrative. And then the question is, how far is she going to go to try to see those colors, to try to get that captured? And that's where the plotting began with me. But that is one, that's something you might notice with the stories. I really work hard to make sure that each of these characters is entirely unique, that they each have a central obsession, sometimes something that's just a little bit off, that's a little bit different. And then that is the thing that begins to serve as an engine for the storytelling, because they start to go in pursuit of those unusual desires. And yeah.
That brings up a question. And well, I did want to say, I love the book the first time I read it. The second time I read this collection, I taught English and literature for 20 years. High school seniors, AP, literature, and a little bit of college. And the second time I read it, I read it more like I was going to teach it for some reason. That got into my head. And I was seeing all these allusions, and I was seeing all of the symbolism. And you don't need to get it to appreciate the stories, but it took me to a whole higher level of appreciation for your craft, for what you did. The allusions and the symbolism, everywhere. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, how did you decide which stories to tell in the first person and which third? Because they were never third person omniscient, if I'm correct. They're all third person limited, but they were first person and third person.
Right. And I think what happened with the third person choices, I was really looking to have a bit of a broader canvas, to sort of pull the camera back a little bit and to have you see into more than one character, so it wasn't going to be kind of that intense, visceral, you're with her as she takes every step, but more of a sense of a broader overview. So I think about the last story, Swimming, which alternates between an aging librarian and the guy who owns the hardware store. And so what happens when I told it in that particular way was that, we get insight into both of those characters, but we also get an overview, a way in which those stories interplay with each other, the way in which those two people's experiences contrasted with each other at various moments, the gentleness of his sexual awakening, the violence of hers, and then their points of connection as he watches her from the woods as she's bathing behind this curtain. And then at the end of the story, you discover that she knew it all along. She kind of knew he was out there. And she just, I guess, allowed it, just simply allowed it. And so, so I think that's what I was looking for in those third person stories, is just to pull back a little bit, to give you more of an overview, to give you a sense of the scope of the place, or more of the characters, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And one of the allusions that I found, and I mentioned it to you in an email, was most, if not all, of the stories seem to take place in Slocum City. And that reminded me of, the Winesburg, Ohio, and I'm going to get the name wrong. Again, I have to look. I know Sherwood Anderson. That's what I was going to say, but I was afraid I was going to say something else. But I didn't know if that was like just happened and you realized it later, or were you a fan of Anderson's, or was this sort of okay, now I'm going to do a kind of a Winesburg, Ohio, but it's going to be all women I'm going to talk about, or was it just serendipitous and coincidence?
Well, I was definitely a fan of Sherwood Anderson, and then later, a huge fan of Elizabeth Strout and what she was able to do.
Oh, I love her too. Yes.
Oh my gosh, what she was able to do. But from Anderson, I think I kind of borrowed that idea of characters having a twist. He talked about people being grotesque and having these strange things they wanted. And so that was something that I thought was an interesting kind of carryover. But then, Elizabeth Strout, the heart and humanity, the degree to which she loves even her most flawed characters, that sort of thing. But I'll be honest, I set out to write initially a set of short stories that had at its center a male photographer from Boston who was traveling through the South. And he was taking pictures, he was meeting these women and taking their pictures, and ultimately, you know, he was the least interesting thing about the book. There was nothing interesting about him at all. I sort of shopped the stories around and nobody really cared about him at all. And it struck me that it was the women in these stories who were so vital and whose lives were really had all the meaning and all the depth and all of the real adventure. And so I just pulled him right out of there. And he does show up in the Kodachrome story. He is
Kodachrome,
the
yeah.
fellow who takes the picture of the young girl. But other than that, it's really about these particular women. And it was liberating once I did that. And then to see how many of the stories I'd written really dealt seriously with the lives of women and girls. And so I just eliminated the male gaze completely. It liberated the stories. And there I had a collection that was cohesive. So
Yeah, it really was. Was Jake in Helter Skelter the same Jake that died in Life After?
no, that wasn't my intention to have
Okay.
him be the same. In fact, I hadn't realized that I'd used that name twice, and that's one of the pitfalls of writing is you're giving people these names, and I think I sort of naturally gravitate to certain names. I think there was one point where I had many stories, and all the women had names that began with A. I'm not sure if it was just easy for me to do that, oh, let's name,
Well, that's the
but-
problem when you're one of your readers is an English teacher, and she's like, "Oh, there's so much symbolism here. Maybe this is it too." So,
yeah.
but I thought the way you handled grief and loss was just so touching in so many ways. I mean, in Harvest, the loss of a good friend, and of course in Life After, the grief, and Heavy Metal, there was grief, and all the different ways that we handle and process and we help each other. I really appreciated that.
That's the thing. I do think part of my coming of age as a writer was experiencing some significant grief myself, the loss of my parents and that sort of thing. And I found that it's very fruitful ground, and could be handled with a particular sensitivity. And, part of, like the real experience of grief, the only way to really get through it is to look it straight in the eye. And so that's part of what I've tried to do in the writing, is to just really have folks experience it and have it be an immersive sort of thing, and then have them try to find their ways through it, with other people or through ritual or whatever the case might be.
And I like that you said through other people, because the three that I mentioned, it seems that they all started to work their way through it when they were able to connect with someone else. Yeah. So, okay. I'd like to talk about After the Fall,
Oh,
because I know what my interpretation of it is, but I want to hear what you intended, because I don't want to impose something else on what you intended. But I just, again, I thought it was a woman making a powerful statement,
yeah, absolutely. I sort of started with a jokey premise, which is she breaks up with her boyfriend because he fails some quiz in a magazine, and then she takes off. She takes off as changes her name to Eve, and she takes off and goes to work in an apple orchard. I thought, why not just load this with all of those associations? Why not just go there? Let's just go there as much as we can go there, But then when she gets in that environment, she comes across a really dangerous man who's got a lot of baggage and a lot of things going on. And
there was a snake in the apple orchard.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so she has to defend herself and really defend her colleagues in the face of his own anger and grief, which really has nothing to do with her, but ultimately, forces her to leave that community and to move on from there. And again, like many things, it starts a little playfully, and then before I know it, I'm in a territory that I never dreamed I would be in there, with very serious things happening. And again, I love objects and items to populate a story. Put her in an apple orchard, and as she drives away, she's eating the apples and throwing them out on the pavement, and they're breaking on the pavement, and leave folks with an image, something that works in 2 or 3 different ways, not just one way. So,
And I love that she stood up not only for herself, but for her coworkers, that she wasn't going to let that go unanswered. And especially in our current environment, standing up for each other, I believe, is so fundamental to any hope we have for the future. So I like that. Yeah. So I talked about some of my favorites, and I asked you some questions, but I'd like to give you some time to say anything you would like about the collection.
Yeah. I think what I'm hoping more than anything is that folks will find their way to the stories, that they'll find themselves in them when they read them. I hear from women, and it's so very meaningful to me when I hear, that they've read something here that's touched them. I will say that the scope of the stories covers the range of female experience. We've got young girls who are friends, young women. We've got older women who are grappling with issues of really sort of getting okay with the fact that they're changing, that they look different, but that ultimately inside, in their heart, they are the person that they've always been. My mother would say to me, "I feel like I'm 16."
My mother would say, the worst part of getting older is you realize you don't look at yourself any differently. You're still you to yourself, but you realize the rest of the world is looking at you differently. And I never understood that when she told me that, because I was in my 30s, maybe early 40s, and it didn't resonate with me. Now I just want to say, well, Mom, you were so right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so I'm hoping then that they hang together for people, that there's something in there for everybody. The stories, a quote that I found that I love, is that I don't write dark stories. I write light, I write fire. And that's from Lori Halls Anderson, who's just such a phenomenal writer. And so I've added that to
meet her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I added that to the bottom of my signature on my emails, because there are people who will look at these stories and think, well, my cousin's wife said to me, "How can you ask people to gut themselves over and over again by reading the stories?" But really, I would say that these stories are illuminative, and there's humor in there, and there's love in there, and every bit of pain that you might end up experiencing is worth it, because it's embedded in the context of love and what it means to be a human being. And so I'm hoping folks can find that hope and humor and the positive things, even in the most serious of stories in the collection. So,
well, and you said your cousin said that to you?
My cousin's wife, yeah.
Your cousin's wife. You're not asking, in my opinion, you're not asking the reader. I didn't feel like I was gutting myself. I felt like I was validating myself. Like, yes, I've felt this way. Or yes, I know what she's feeling. Or I've seen that. I mean, there was a recognition in every story of some character, of some situation, of some emotion. There was a recognition. So I would confront her with that.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you very much. Here's the other thing too. If you do learn about the stories and read them and like them, feel free to review them on the different forums that are available for that. Feel free to request it from your library. I'm hoping I go and drop them off at little free libraries. I give them to women that I know. I'm hoping the stories will find their people.
Well, I did share, quite honestly, I live in a very red area, so I don't have a lot of friends here. But I did share your book with a dear friend, and she felt the same way I do about it. She really, really enjoyed it. One of the and I don't know if I want to call it the most modern story, but emoticon I thought was so real. And I just loved the ending of that, because back when you could go to a restaurant and you would see people not talk to each other, but they'd be involved with a virtual person, but not the real life person, 18 inches away from them.
Right,
And
right.
I just love how that story ended. It was like, you go, girl.
It was so cathartic to write it. It was so fun to write it. And again, it's sort of about missing that thing that's right in front of our noses, that human contact that's right there, that opportunity that's just right there.
And
Yeah.
not only the human elements that one of the characters was missing, the beautiful geographic setting of Lake Como.
Absolutely.
That one was a good one. And again, I'm just jotting down at my notes here.
Yeah.
Well, we only had 4 finalists, so we're very pleased to have you among the finalists for the Clara Johnson Award. And I was one of the first round of readers, so it was definitely a finalist choice for me. So,
I have to tell you, I'm just honored to be in such a great group. I'm familiar with the other women in the category, and I was just honored to be among them, and have long known about the award, and just appreciate what you all do. Thanks so much
for you. I don't know if you had a chance to see Tiari Jones's video on our Facebook page, where she talked about the importance of stories, and particularly women's stories, and your collection ties directly in to what she said about how important that is. So I hope you have a chance to do some readings at some high schools or some universities to women's groups. Or
yeah, it's been very, I'm not out and about much. I have done a lot of online readings. There's a River City series that's coming up. I'll be reading with them over, I think it's probably over Facebook Live. I'm going to do the Louisville Book Festival. That's going to be October 23rd. I'm going to actually be on a panel about creating authentic women characters. It should be accessible via Zoom. So it's October 23rd from 12 to 1. And then I'll be at the Kentucky Book Festival, which actually will be a fully masked but in-person event the first weekend in November, or I'm sorry, the second weekend in November, I think November 6th at Joseph Beth Bookstore in Lexington, Kentucky. So that'll be my first real foray out into the world with the book. But I take advantage of every opportunity I have to read.
That's great. I'm intrigued by the October 23rd thing you mentioned about creating authentic women characters. And that if you have a chance, and I apologize for asking you to do something, because it sounds like you have a lot going on, but if you could maybe give us some details of that, and we'll be happy to promote those on the Facebook page. We're in the process of revamping our web page, but the Facebook page is very active. So
I'll do that. I'll send those along.
That'll be great. Okay, so we've been talking to Ellen Birkett Morris, the author of the short story collection, I get this in the camera right, Lost Girls? And she was a finalist for the 2021 Clara Johnson Award this year, presented by the Jane Stories Press Foundation. Thank you very much.